is the fact that people wait and wait and wait until they have a heart attack, and then they need $200,000 worth of surgery, whereas if they had gone in a year or two earlier and gotten some preventative medicine, that would have helped. Now, the second thing is the issue of individual responsibility in all of this, and the idea that and this is something that can be taken out of context. I am certainly not suggesting. Yeah, I am certainly not suggesting that all Americans are lazy, but unfortunately, laziness is an endemic problem to this society.
Well, it's not a problem. It's us. That's what we are. That's not a problem. It's not bad. It's good. It's us. It's what we are. I criticize it.
But I don't want to tell you that you have to pay
that's right.
my lung
Absolutely.
because I smoked for the
that's
last
right.
30
That's
years.
right.
That's not right.
But if you're paying into a private insurance policy, that's the system that you have already.
But the private insurance policy is going to make you pay higher premiums because you smoke. They make me pay a higher
insurance if I smoke, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, you do pay for it. Everything that everybody. This is the problem. Is ideally we would be responsible for nobody but our individual selves and our household. Realistically, we're already in this system together. And so we have to, the solutions that we have to look at have to be realistic. Now, I know I'm not going to convince you on this, so I'm not going to try, and hopefully we'll move on to another subject after this. But the bottom line for me, where it comes down to on the healthcare issue and a few other things, is it's not universal healthcare, a national healthcare system. It's not the ideal solution, but it's the best solution that we can come up with now to maybe get to a place later on where we can change the system a little more deeply. And that's where I come down. And again, on a lot of these issues, it's just a matter of being realistic. And again, going back to we were talking about the monetary issue. The reason, I have to be honest, I don't know what the solution is, because there are a lot of things that we could do that if this was 1900 would be no problem, like fixing a gold standard and fixing a silver standard. But is that going to work in the global market?
Well, basically, you have to cut expenses, and if you do that, you'll have a stronger dollar on its own. Mm-hmm. And my worry about having a national health care, like I say, is just piling on, because you have to dismantle the military complex. You have to cut down on social spending here, and you have to make inroads to at least change the direction of that. And if all of a sudden you come in with a national health care, it's going to be, you're going to have to cut deals with the military, you've got to cut deals with the social, and before you know it,
well, again, on the healthcare issue, the reality is we already have socialized medicine. It's called Medicare, Medicaid.
Right.
And the people that are on Medicare, Medicaid are the people who make the least money in the pool. It's the poorest people and the oldest people who aren't working. So basically what you have is we're trying to cover the two extremes of the system, whereas everybody who's actually of working age and is healthy, obviously we're all paying into Medicare, but I mean, we're not being paid into, we're not paying the same amount as we are if it was a national health system, because we're paying Medicare regardless of if it's going to be available when we retire or not, and then we're also paying our private premiums on top of that. And this is another big problem. This has directly to do with America's ability to compete in the international market. Is not only do we have to pay big premiums, not only do we have to pay into to Medicare, but our employers do as well. Something like, it's an estimate, I think it's between $1,200 and $1,400 of every car manufactured in the United States is employee health care costs that the GM or that Ford has to pay. Right. Our Japanese competitors don't have to pay that because they have a national health care system.
This is where Lee Iacocca is like right on the money. I mean, I don't agree with everything he's written or said, but there's a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to fair trade. I think he's right on the money with a lot of it. I mean, he's even on the record going to Japan and saying, you know what, you guys really don't need to be worried about your economy over here. What you need to worry about is how's the economy doing in the United States? Because if we're not doing good, you're not doing good.
Yeah, but I think they understand. I mean, anybody with half a brain understands.
Well, no, like Ron Paul says that
they shouldn't be able to come here and do.
What Jeff just said a few minutes ago about Japan working in America but not having to follow the rules.
That's because our rules are bad, not because they're here doing it. It's just like if you ever listen to I assume know about the fair tax and all that.
Right. Of course.
23% tax if he's right, and I'm just, is 23% of the cost of anything we export has got 23% imputed tax. Whereas when they send stuff here, 0 tax.
Thank you very much.
We do it to ourselves.
We give away
That's
the
where we get
farm.
away. And let's get back to you wanting to fix the healthcare system now. You said, hey, preventive medicine works. And taking care of the catastrophe is not the right way. And it's just like she said, you're trying to put a bandage on it by taking care of health, by having universal health. Go in and fix the infrastructure.
You know what? If you straighten out the trade problem, if you straighten out the trade deficit, you could pay for any kind of healthcare system you wanted to. There'd be enough money there to where we wouldn't have to worry. We could create.
I'll tell
the
you what,
best
if your
of
tax
everything.
rate was based on your blood work, you know what I'm saying? So if I come to see you and you
Your
report to the
cholesterol's high,
IRS
$3,000 this
that
month.
I'm, you know, my lipids or this and my, you know, I don't understand all that stuff. But if I'm healthy, I only have to pay 5% tax. But if I'm not healthy, I have to pay 30.
Just like an
You know?
airplane. If you're fat now, you should pay more.
There'll be an
Well,
underground market for
that's
clean
the whole
blood.
point.
This
Those
is,
kinds of things, we're laughing, but I'm
Hey, buddy,
totally
spare a
dead
little couple drops
serious.
here.
well, you know, what we have to look at when we're talking about international trade, again, the problem that we have here is a complete lack of transparency, number one, and number two, that we've got the foxes minding the hen house. That we go out and we make these deals that are supposedly free trade deals or fair trade deals, whatever they want to call it, and it's anything but. Because in principle, NAFTA is about free trade between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. In practice, what it is every major corporation that had some influence on the process has made sure that their interests are protected, and that, you know, classic example is the tomatoes.
Nobody else.
Yeah, you know, we passed NAFTA, and Mexican tomatoes were cheaper than tomatoes grown in Florida. So the Florida tomato growers went up and said, you know what, tomatoes shouldn't be covered under this. We need a tariff on those. And this is what happens with all these agreements. In principle, I would love to see free trade. But I think every nation has a right to decide how trade is conducted within their borders. So in principle, I think the United States and the EU should have free trade. Get rid of these tariffs. We get rid of everything, because these are essentially equal economies. A country like Bangladesh, for example, Bangladesh should have the same right that the United States has or that Britain has, that they can say no to these free trade agreements because they want to preserve their native industry. The United States should have the same exact right. We should be able, and we're the only country in the world that really doesn't do this. Every country in the world protects, has certain protections on their workers, has certain protections on their trade. And this isn't, I'm not talking protectionism here. What I'm talking about is reasonable precautions to make sure that every job in Florida doesn't go to India, and then we're stuck in the situation that we're in now, where if you're an unskilled laborer, you're looking at $6, $7 an hour, and there's no other options. Now, I'm not saying that companies shouldn't have the option to go over there, but it shouldn't be subsidized by the federal government, which is the system that we have now.
It shouldn't be cheaper for you. To
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's part of that because of the imputed tax.
Exactly.
You know, if you really study economics, you'll see that free trade, one-sided, is better than controlled trade, both-sided. So even if we have free trade, we're going to end up on the head, but the imputed tax kills us. That's the big killer. That's why I'm a big supporter of the fair tax.
Well, you know, just from living in Japan, when I lived in Japan, for me to go buy an American car, actually for me to buy a Japanese car over there, yeah, I could buy that same exact vehicle, maybe with a little bit different badging and names, in Japan for almost dollar for dollar, the exact same amount it cost me, or it might even be a little cheaper to buy it here, buy it at home here in Florida. However, if I was going to buy a Mustang or an American car of any sort in Japan, there's no way I couldn't save enough money over the course of a lifetime to buy one over there. You know, it was, if not 5 or 6 times more, it was 10 times more.
But ultimately it caught up with Japan because Japan went into tank.
Yeah.
And, you know, ultimately, you know, if you leave things alone economically, it balances. It takes, you know,
They're still
Yeah,
doing it.
yes and no. And this is let me get this out here because this you might feel, some of you might feel that this is a difference. You know, when people ask me, you know, how to pigeon my political beliefs, I would say that I'm a progressive libertarian. People ask me what that means. That means essentially I'm a libertarian, but I think Milton Friedman was full of crap. And the reason I say that, and I say that in jest, but when you talk about the marketing balancing, it depends on how you define balance. If you define balance as 10% has 90% of the money and 90% of people only have 10% of the money, then yeah, that's a balance. But is it a balance that is good for everybody? Is it a balance that in the long term is going to foster real development in that society, or are you going to have a French-style Bastille Day type of revolution every 100 years? And this is what we have to look at. And this is why, going back to when I talk about my fundamental philosophy of government, is that private industry and the market is the best thing to take care of individual rights and individual needs, and the best institution to take care of our shared responsibilities is government. And if I didn't add this before, let me make this perfectly clear. And the two need to be kept as separate as possible, because you don't want too much government interference in the market, because we see what happens. We're seeing this every day. And by extension, you don't want too much private interference in government, because we have the same problem now. The biggest problem that we have right now, all of these problems that we're talking about, this all comes back down to our election system and the way that people are getting in office. Because the reason these corporations get such undue influence is not simply because they have so much money, but because they can spend that money to buy
and labor unions. And
yes,
special interest, it's all around.
Here's where I kind of disagree with you, because if we went back to some type of discipline in the monetary system, there wouldn't be any spoils to split up.
Well,
there wouldn't be any deficit spending. There wouldn't be any money to everybody. Would, you know, there wouldn't be any social programs expansion of the whole system, because you couldn't do it, because there was no. You didn't create enough gold to back that currency.
I think you're probably right, but again, this is a here to there situation. How do we get from here to there?
And it's all about, you know, cutting back on spending and creating a dollar rally, basically.
And one of the areas you asked me, you know, the areas that I agree with on Ron Paul, and this is another area where we need to dismantle this empire. America is not meant to be an empire. We don't need troops in 130 countries. We don't need to be fighting a senseless war in Iraq. We don't need to expand the war into Iran. All of this is anathema to the principles that this country was founded on. And it is also anathema to what is in the best interest, not only the American people, but the world at large. The age of superpowers is over. We have a multipolar globe now, and we need to be able to recognize that the United States is one nation among many. All of us here at this table, I'm sure we all agree, this is the greatest country in the world, no question about it, but it's still one country among many. And what we have to offer the rest of the world is, it doesn't come from the fact that we have the biggest economy. It doesn't come from the fact that we have the most powerful military. What we have to offer the world is that we have a clear vision of what democracy should be, of what unity should be, of how we can all work together to achieve greater things. You know, one of the great things about this country is that this country is the idea of the melting pot. And when you look at the social system, or if you look at the society in Europe, for all of the great things that the EU has done, for all of the advances, you know, on the economic front that they're making now, there's a fundamental problem in Europe. If you're a Frenchman, you hate the Germans. If you're German, you hate the French. If you're French, you hate the Muslims. If you're a Muslim in France, you hate the French.
Well, plus they never become. They never become. A Muslim never becomes a German.
Exactly.
Never
and this is what America is all about, is that we take, all of us are from someplace else.
Except the politicians want to pull us back apart.
Right.
And we got blacks, we got Indians, we got Hispanics, and we got short people, we got tall people, we got fat people.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Jeff, you aren't saying that the United States' role is to spread democracy through the world.
No, what I'm saying is that we lead by example. Is that when people see the United States working well, and we talked about, you know, the idea of giving everybody military aid, you know, giving Saudi Arabia military aid, something else with Israel, giving military aid, giving Egypt military aid. This is giving everybody matches and a pool of gasoline is what this is. And
Well, I don't know.
I think the United
They don't have
States,
matches already.
yeah,
Yeah.
the United
Already.
States giving them more matches and saying,
Play nice.
yeah, and the role of the United States in foreign policy, I think the best role that we could play is not by going to a country where there's a conflict between two sides, taking one side, arming that side. The best role that we could play is that if we're true to our ideals and we're true to our principles, we can go, for example, the Palestinian-Israeli situation. If we were honest to goodness, fair brokers in that situation, that problem would be solved overnight. But the problem that we have there is that we unfairly hold one side to a different set of standards than the other side. And as long as we do that, we're going to create chaos. I think the United States, not by going in and with all this crazy military aid, with all this crazy foreign aid, trying to prop up governments or trying to enact regime change, but we can have a positive impact by being fair brokers. And this is a role that we used to have. You know, it's interesting, in the Middle East right now, nobody wants to deal with when people want to broker a peace deal, they would come to the U.S. The last 8 years, that's changed. Syria is talking to Israel through Turkey. The Hamas was talking to Israel.
Does that mean they're talking Turkey?
Yes, it does. For the first time in 8 years, actually, they're talking Turkey.
It sounds an awful lot, kind of like, and I know sometimes I don't always agree with Ron Paul on this, but the isolationists, become isolationists, the things that enabled us to let somebody like Hitler rise to the level that he did.
Well, that's a good case of interference, because I mean, the main factor that allowed Hitler to rise to power was the Weimar Republic, was the fact that the triumphant powers so thoroughly, instead of enacting a Marshall Plan type of resolution, they so thoroughly punished Germany that the German people rebelled against everything they had and looked to a nationalist leader because they felt humiliated, their economy was falling apart and everything.
Actually,
that's a case of interference.
I just listened to a Pat Buchanan interview. He just wrote a really good book on how World War II could have been avoided, and he mentioned a lot what he just said about World War I. In fact, I'm going to go buy it probably today. After.
Well, that's what Ron was saying in his book. He was talking about
Right.
President Wilson and all the things he did.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be isolation.
No, it's not isolation.
But it should be. It should be. I don't care what happens in the rest of the world. I don't even want to get involved.
It's
I don't
too
want to
complicated
broker.
to figure
That's
out.
not my job.
Yeah, it's
My
too
job is to protect us.
Well,
to leave us free and let us be.
You can.
I don't want
what
to
I'm
get
talking
involved.
about when I'm talking about brokering deals is I'm not talking about dumping foreign aid on a problem or taking one side against the other. I'm talking about being people recognized as an
The only problem with that is what if someone didn't like the deal?
Yeah.
And they became terrorists or whatever.
We can't, and I know Ron Paul. I know for a fact that Ron Paul is not an isolationist.
No, he's not. He's
So,
not.
isolationism would never work. And again, we have a global economy. We have a global society is emerging, for good or bad. I mean, you and I sitting at this table have as much in common with somebody sitting at a similar table in Germany or in Japan than a similar group of people did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. We have a global society emerging, so we have to be constructive players in that process. But we don't want to, again, it's being friends with everybody, but being allies to none. You know, and that's the way to do it. Basically, it's like how we all interact in our neighborhood. If there's a domestic dispute down the street, you know, and you're friends with the couple, if you're friendly with them and you try and suggest reasonable solutions, that works. If you go and you take the wife's side or you take the husband's side, what's going to happen?
Jeff, I have a question for you. We want to dismantle this foreign empire, reduce military spending. Now, the fact that you were in military intelligence, how do we maintain that same type of intelligence, whether it be, uniting the CIA with Army intelligence or whatever, and still maintain the safety that will be required for this country?
Well, first of all, I got out of military intelligence in '92. This guy back here, I don't know if all of you met him, this is Mohammed, and he has been an invaluable source of support in this campaign. He got out of the Army last year. He was Army intelligence also. And unfortunately, it looks like he may very well be getting stop-loss back into the Army in October. But he and I have had numerous discussions about this. And, you know, first of all, the Department of Homeland Security was a mistake.
Oh,
Thank
gee,
you.
very much.
Oh, you just
Basically, we just created a big, huge bureaucracy.
That was the
What a
epitome
mess.
of,
Yeah.
it's not my fault. How do I hold anybody? I don't want to really hold anybody accountable. We'll
accountability.
create a new department.
Yeah, exactly. That and
That's exactly what happened.
yeah,
Yep.
and so
That's the military's creed now.
yes,
Yeah.
The core values. I'm not going to hold you accountable.
So we're going to give you a new
I'm
boss.
gonna-
We're going to promote you and
You go do it. He'll sit over there with his feet.
Well, here's a good example. You know, when it comes to cases of prisoner abuse or cases of torture that we've been seeing, there is no private that is too high of a rank to be prosecuted in the military.
absolutely.
You know, and this is the
Or
thing.
no reservist general that we can't recall.
Yeah.
just in
Yeah,
time
exactly.
To
How
make
was
her
I supposed
responsible.
to know?
Yeah, and nobody. This kind of responsibility has to come from the top.
Right,
And when you have a
because
system,
a lot of us haven't been in the military, so it just kind of fills in on this joke. The fact that they just punish the little guys.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
No,
they
sure.
punish the lowest ranking people.
Not necessarily.
They always
It's
look for
more of
benefit
like
fall
this.
Yeah.
It's like our society. It's a mirror image of our society where instead of making Jane pay for her
That's much.
addiction, we're going to fund over here this special program for people that are addicted like Jane, and we're all going to pay for it, but we're not going to hold Jane accountable. We're just going to create this thing. And that's what happens in all facets of government. That's why when you say nationalized health care, we look at you like you're from Mars.
Even when you say shared responsibility, that is.
There's no accountability now.
That's
What
right.
are you going to do? What are you and people like you, what are we going to do to hold these people
Isn't it
accountable?
a top-down effect? We have to hold the uppermost important or knowledgeable or claim to be important people accountable first. And if it's top-down, then you can